Well, it was probably fair to say it was an unexpected vision at that press conference, but it's not a bad thing either. I'm not critical at all of Greg Hunt for doing that. What we saw here was a practical difference being made by Twiggy Forrest, and to enable an increase in the number of tests that are taking place here in Australia. Australia always has to stand up for our own national interest, and that's what we've done. Here, Australians, as well as others, it must be said, have an interest in finding out exactly the details of how this crisis came about, the source of the virus, how it happened, not as an academic exercise, but so that we can avoid it ever happening again.
And would you be willing to do that at the risk of our trade balance sheet? Shouldn't we be trying to de-escalate tensions with China, considering we'll need that country as we emerge from this terrible economic situation that Australia is facing?
Well, the relationship with China is an important one for Australia, but I regard it as completely unremarkable, the idea that there should be an investigation into this. That's pretty obvious when we have one death in this country from unexplained circumstances. We often have coronial inquiries. We're talking here about a virus that has had an impact on the entire globe, and therefore I regard it as completely unremarkable. It certainly isn't an attack on any nation, China or anyone else. It's just a simple going about normal common sense business, and I think that should be recognised. There's no need for any tension to increase over that. I regard it as unremarkable. What I'm concerned about more is how we continue to deal with the health issues, but reduce the economic impact of this current crisis. We heard yesterday in the Senate Select Committee that 160,000 Australians lost their jobs and went on to the Centrelink queues in between the JobSeeker announcement and it beginning on the day that Parliament was sitting. And on that very day, I said if we were going to do something in a week's time, we should do it today. Well, they did that in a week's time. They changed their mind on wage subsidies and announced JobKeeper. But in the meantime, there were 160,000 people joined the Centrelink queues that didn't need to if the government had made that decision earlier, when it should have, when Labor was arguing for wage subsidies as an essential component of the response to this crisis.
You can't announce a $130 billion scheme that's been devised on the back of an envelope, though, can you? Reports out of Treasury and other departments were that they were all working around the clock to get that scheme to the point where the I's were dotted, the T's were crossed. There was nothing stopping employers who'd sacked workers in that week period that you're talking about to then bring them back into the tent once that JobKeeper scheme was announced.
Ash, they opposed it. They not only opposed it publicly in the Parliament, in the media, they opposed it when we were raising those issues privately. As you know, there was meetings between senior members of the government and opposition prior to Parliament sitting. We were arguing for some time that wage subsidies were important. The government rejected that concept. Unions were arguing it, business was arguing it. We had unusual circumstances of joint statements from the Australian Retailers Association and the SDA, the Shop Assistants Union. We had unions and employers all saying what we needed to do was to keep that relationship between individual employers and individual employees, and JobKeeper was a way to do it through wage subsidies. The government got there in the end. To their credit, they changed their mind. But there was an impact of that delay.
Just on another big issue, schools. We've seen a number of schools around the country opening up today. The federal government is offering to bring forward funding for private schools, putting independent schools in Victoria in particular, where the government at a state level is being hardline on schools, in an awkward position. Do you support that move by the Federal Education Minister? We know that non-government schools are facing falling enrolments. The government is really just adjusting the timing, isn't it, of one of the regular scheduled payments to help improve cash flow issues.
Look, we'll examine any detail that's put forward, but it seems to us that this isn't new money. It's just a slight change in the timing of when money would be forwarded, which of course will have an impact. No doubt if you bring forward funding to the current financial year, you increase the deficit this year but make the budget position better in the subsequent year, which is closer to an election.